The text arrived just as I was about to lock the study door. I transferred everything from your inheritance fund to help Alex. Don't try to stop me. Love, Claire. My fingers froze on the pen I'd been using to sign some routine paperwork. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, unable to comprehend what I had just read. Alex. The man she'd been hiding from me for months. Claire, my wife of 10 years, had quietly emptied the trust left to me by my late father, the fund meant to secure my future. My chest tightened, and I dropped the phone onto the desk. This was more than betrayal. This was deliberate, calculated theft. I needed time to think, but I didn't have the luxury. Tomorrow, I had a meeting with the executor, Mr. Bennett. He was thorough, meticulous, and if anyone could reveal the trail she thought she'd hidden, it was him. I clenched my fists, my mind racing through every suspicious purchase, late-night outings, and small lies that I had brushed aside for the sake of harmony. Claire would regret this. I could feel it deep in my bones. But first, I had to be patient. The call from the executor was my first move, and I wasn't about to let her know I suspected anything yet. Morning came, gray and cold, as I sat in the cramped office of Bennett and Associates. Mr. Bennett, a tall man with a calm demeanor, peered over his glasses at me. You sounded urgent on the phone, Thomas. What's happened? I took a deep breath, careful not to reveal too much. It's my wife. Something's off with my inheritance fund. I need a full review before any transactions are finalized. Bennett nodded slowly, fingers tapping the polished mahogany desk. We can certainly do that. I'll need account access and all statements from the past 6 months. My stomach twisted. 6 months. That was when I had first noticed the subtle shifts, the charges for fancy hotels she never mentioned, the sudden withdrawal for an art gallery I'd never visited, and the unaccounted transfers to Alex. I handed over the documents I'd managed to gather discreetly over the past weeks. Bennett's eyes flicked over each page, lips pursed. Thomas, some of these entries are highly irregular. I'll begin a trace immediately. Relief surged in me, but I masked it with a neutral expression. Claire might think she had been clever, but she had underestimated me. If she thought I wouldn't notice, if she thought she could escape scrutiny, she was about to learn that patience and careful observation were more powerful than deceit. Later that evening, Claire returned from her meeting with Alex, her face bright with the thrill of her audacity. I watched her from the study doorway, silent, pretending to read. She leaned casually against the counter, phone in hand, scrolling and smiling at messages from Alex. Dinner went well, she said casually, as if our marriage hadn't just been undermined with a few taps on her phone. I kept my voice calm. Glad to hear that. Her eyes flicked to me, sensing something, but she smiled dismissive. You always worry too much, Thomas. Everything's fine. Fine? Everything was far from fine. I had already alerted Bennett to the irregularities, and every transaction she had made would be accounted for. She thought she was untouchable, but I had been documenting her every step. Receipts, screenshots, timestamps, phone logs, I had everything. Her confidence, her casual arrogance, would be her undoing. I took a deep breath and returned to my paperwork, leaving her in the kitchen, oblivious. The next few days would be critical. Bennett promised a full trace by Friday. By then, she would have no time to cover her tracks. And when that call came, when the executor laid everything bare, Claire would be forced to face the consequences of her reckless choices. I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing the first move was mine. Thursday afternoon, Bennett called. My heart raced as I answered. Thomas, I've traced the fund transfers. They all lead to accounts under Alex's name. Your wife moved substantial sums over the past 6 months. Some entries even include personal checks she forged in your name. Silence. My knuckles whitened as I gripped the phone. Every precaution I'd taken, Every suspicion I had quietly nurtured was now confirmed. "Can this be reversed?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Bennett paused. "We can freeze the accounts immediately and initiate legal proceedings. I recommend confronting her only after we secure the assets." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. Patience was key. Claire thought she had the upper hand, but she had no idea that her every action was being documented. She had underestimated my foresight, my ability to see beneath her polished exterior. I let the silence stretch before speaking again. "Thank you, Bennett. Keep me updated. Do not involve her yet." I ended the call, breathing slowly. My plan was forming. Confrontation would be dramatic, deliberate, and public if necessary. Alex thought he was clever, thinking he could enjoy the wealth my family left me. Claire believed she was untouchable, counting on my supposed ignorance. But they were both about to learn a lesson in vigilance and patience. This was only the beginning. That night, Claire dropped her phone on the couch and sank into a chair, sipping her wine. I watched from the study, pretending to write, while my mind raced. She had emptied the inheritance fund, believing the transfer was irrevocable. She had laughed over texts to Alex, boasting about her cunning plan. But I had already covered my bases. Copies of her messages, screenshots of transfers, emails confirming bank approvals, all safely stored and time-stamped. I imagined the look on her face when the freeze order hit, when Bennett revealed the trail she thought she had erased. I reminded myself to remain calm. The law was on my side. Patience and evidence, not emotion, would deliver justice. I could have confronted her immediately, screamed, accused. But the power of restraint was far more satisfying. Let her believe she had won. Let her savor the temporary thrill. The executor's call would stop her cold. The next few days would be suspenseful, tense, and ultimately decisive. And I would savor every moment of watching her carefully constructed fantasy crumble under the weight of her own audacity. Friday morning, I received another call from Bennett. "Thomas, I've frozen the accounts. No further withdrawals are possible. Your wife has no access." Relief washed over me, but I remained calm, masking the thrill. Claire had no idea the game had shifted. She thought she was untouchable, but the foundation of her scheme had just collapsed. I spent the day observing her closely, noting how her demeanor changed ever so slightly, subtle cracks in her otherwise confident facade. Each sip of wine, each casual glance at her phone, betrayed anxiety she didn't understand. I recognized. I also reviewed the messages between her and Alex. His arrogance was almost as shocking as her audacity. They believed they had outsmarted me, blind to the fact that I had already positioned myself for the ultimate reveal. The executor's evidence would leave them exposed, with no plausible excuses. I drafted a timeline, noting every suspicious transaction, every lie she had told, every late-night excuse she had whispered to cover her deceit. Patience was still key. Confronting her too soon would alert her. Let her think she had control. By tomorrow, Bennett promised a full report ready for review. And then, the moment of reckoning would arrive, like a thunderclap in the calm of our home. That evening, I cooked dinner, letting Claire chatter about her day. Her tone was light, almost flirty, trying to distract from her recent anxiety. I smiled politely, careful not to show the storm of thoughts raging inside me. Every detail mattered now. The pattern of her gestures, the way she hesitated mid-sentence when mentioning Alex, the subtle tightening of her jaw whenever money came up. I placed my fork down deliberately, watching her as she spoke. "You seem tense, Thomas. Something on your mind?" she asked, sipping her wine with false ease. I shook my head. "Just work stress," I said, hiding the triumph in my eyes. She nodded, satisfied, and returned to her conversation with a renewed smile, oblivious that the trap was set. I continued documenting everything, preparing a dossier for Bennett. Every text, every bank notification, every transaction was carefully saved. By morning, the executor's full report would be ready, and my confrontation would be unstoppable. I imagined the shock on her face when confronted with undeniable proof of her betrayal. I reminded myself that the law and timing were my allies. Emotional outbursts now could jeopardize the entire plan. I had to remain calm, calculating, and patient. Her sense of security was her weakness. I would exploit it with precision. And when the revelation came, the shock, the panic, and the guilt would all be hers to endure. Saturday arrived with tension thick in the air. Claire moved around the house with forced nonchalance, unaware that the executor had already secured the accounts. I spent the morning reviewing every detail with Bennett over the phone, confirming transfers, tracing digital footprints, and noting suspicious communications. Each irregularity was more damning than the last. The financial evidence painted a clear picture. Claire had emptied my inheritance to help Alex, and she had tried to cover her tracks with minor forgeries and deceptive phone logs. Bennett's calm voice carried the gravity of the situation. "Thomas, the evidence is irrefutable. She cannot claim ignorance." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. I felt a quiet satisfaction. Claire thought she was clever, but every move she had made was recorded, time-stamped, and traceable. I prepared mentally for the confrontation. It needed to be precise, undeniable, and leave no room for excuses. The executor's call, when delivered, would stop her cold. I planned the moment carefully, picturing her reaction as I presented the full dossier. Her confidence would crumble, her arrogance replaced by panic. I reminded myself to stay composed. Revenge was not the goal. Justice was. Yet, I couldn't deny the anticipation thrumming through my chest. The next 24 hours would decide everything. That evening, Claire suggested a walk, an attempted distraction, I suspected. I agreed, walking alongside her quietly, pretending to enjoy the night air. She spoke of mundane things, neighbors, upcoming events, her latest purchase for the house. I listened but focused on her subtle tells, the way she fidgeted with her bag strap, the quick glances at her phone. Patience, I reminded myself. The executor's report would arrive in the morning, and every lie she had told would be laid bare. I imagined the call from Bennett, the documentation of transfers, the proof of deception, all of it meticulously organized. Claire's false confidence would shatter instantly. I didn't need to accuse her tonight. Letting her believe she was safe made the eventual confrontation all the more devastating. We returned home, her voice lighter, unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. Every detail, every suspicious activity had been captured. I reviewed my mental checklist. Account freezes, evidence compiled, communications documented. All paths led to a decisive moment when she would finally understand the magnitude of her betrayal. The executor's call was the key, the trigger that would stop her in her tracks and ensure that justice, not anger, prevailed. Sunday morning, Bennett called. My pulse quickened. "Thomas, the report is ready. Every transaction has been traced. Your wife transferred over 70% of the inheritance to Alex, using forged documents and false explanations. I recommend confronting her today." I thanked him and hung up, heart racing. This was it. I had prepared for weeks, and the moment of truth had arrived. Claire was in the kitchen, humming softly, oblivious. I cleared my throat. "Claire, I need to discuss something important." She looked up, curiosity flickering in her eyes. I handed her the folder containing all the documentation, screenshots, bank statements, email confirmations, and timestamped messages. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. This can't be real," she whispered, voice trembling. I shook my head, calm and deliberate. "It's all real. Every transfer, every lie, Every message to Alex is documented. Her composure crumbled, panic overtaking her usual arrogance. She tried to speak, but no words came. I watched, silent, as the reality of her actions sank in. The executor's call, the evidence, the meticulous tracing, all had stopped her cold, leaving her exposed and powerless. Claire sat frozen, staring at the folder like it contained a foreign language. Her hands trembled, coffee forgotten on the table. I didn't mean, she stammered. Her voice cracked, a sound I had never heard before. I didn't interrupt. I let her unravel. Weeks of deception, manipulation, and lies had led to this moment. I had imagined it countless times, each scenario more vivid than the last. Seeing her panic, her confident facade crumbling, gave me a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that justice was imminent, sorrow for the marriage that had been poisoned by betrayal. Every transaction, every message, every false excuse is here, I said softly. I gave you trust, Claire, and you used it to help him. She buried her face in her hands, shaking. Thomas, I just wanted to help him, she whispered. I shook my head. You crossed a line that cannot be undone, and now you face the consequences. Her silence confirmed it. I wasn't angry. I was certain. The truth had power, more than anger or revenge. And as she sat there, confronted by irrefutable proof, I realized the depth of the betrayal and the clarity of my path forward. This was the reckoning I had been waiting for. After a long silence, Claire's tears slowed. I handed her a tissue, my hands steady. She looked up at me, face pale, eyes wide. What will happen now? She asked, voice barely audible. I explained calmly. The inheritance would remain secured under the executor's control, frozen until legal measures could fully address her actions. She nodded, swallowing hard, as if the weight of her choices finally hit her. I didn't lecture. I didn't raise my voice. Facts and evidence spoke louder than any words I could have said. Claire slumped back into her chair, defeated. She had underestimated the methodical nature of truth, of justice. Over the past few weeks, I had built a meticulous case, collecting each piece of her deception like a puzzle. The executor had confirmed it all. Now, nothing she said could change reality. Alex, the man she risked everything for, was irrelevant. Her choices had sealed her fate. As I watched her process the consequences, I realized how delicate trust was, and how quickly it could be shattered. The betrayal had been intimate, calculated, and utterly devastating, yet it had also revealed my resilience and clarity. I had stayed calm, patient, and focused, and that patience had ensured justice would prevail. Claire's phone buzzed. She reached for it reflexively, but I stopped her. No calls, no excuses. Not now, I said firmly. Panic flashed across her face. I reminded her that Alex would offer no salvation. The money was gone, the evidence undeniable. She sank back, shivering slightly, realizing that her lover could not save her from the reality she had created. I continued to speak softly but deliberately, walking her through every transfer, every fabricated story. Each revelation drew more despair from her, and I felt a quiet triumph, not over her personally, but over the chaos she had tried to orchestrate. The law, logic, and timing had turned the tables. Weeks of covert observation, meticulous documentation, and collaboration with the executor had culminated in this singular, unavoidable moment. Claire's facade of control disintegrated before me. The truth had exposed her completely, and she had nowhere to hide. Even as tears rolled down her cheeks, I remained calm, steady, unwavering. Her panic and regret were not my entertainment. They were the natural consequence of her actions. And as the reality of her betrayal sank in, I realized that patience and preparation were more powerful than confrontation, anger, or revenge. This was justice, pure and undeniable. By midday, Claire had grown quiet, almost motionless, consumed by thought. I went to the office, leaving the folder on the dining table. Even from a distance, I could sense her staring at it, unable to resist revisiting the proof of her betrayal. I returned after an hour, confident she hadn't touched anything else. She spoke softly, almost in disbelief. "Thomas, why? Why didn't you notice sooner?" I smiled faintly. "I noticed. I just waited for the right time." She blinked, processing my words. The executor's call had been the catalyst, but it was my careful planning that ensured there was no escape. Every detail mattered. Timestamps, transactions, messages, excuses, all woven together into a narrative she could not dispute. Claire's realization of her own failure was almost palpable. I didn't need to yell or argue. The truth had done the work for me. For the first time, she seemed entirely human, stripped of arrogance, manipulation, and deceit. It was surreal to witness. She had underestimated my patience, my attention to detail, and my willingness to let the evidence speak. Now, all that remained was for the legal process to formalize what was already clear. Her betrayal could not be undone, and she could not manipulate her way out. Justice had arrived, methodically, without theatrics, leaving her exposed in the stark light of truth. Later, she asked quietly about the executor, almost fearful of his involvement. I explained that Bennett would guide the process to secure the inheritance and ensure no further misappropriation occurred. Claire nodded slowly, her pride broken, the gravity of the situation settling in. I never thought you'd catch everything," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond immediately. Her admission confirmed what I already knew. Patience and meticulous observation had been more effective than confrontation or accusation. She had acted impulsively, guided by emotion and blind trust in Alex, believing she could manipulate events without consequence. Every detail she had overlooked, every subtle clue she had dismissed, had been documented and verified. And now, the consequences were irreversible. I felt no pleasure in her defeat, only a deep sense of clarity and resolution. Trust, once broken, had to be addressed decisively, and the methodical exposure of her deception was the only way. Claire finally seemed to grasp the weight of her actions. The executor's role, my careful observation, and the undeniable evidence had created a situation from which she could not escape. The lessons were harsh, but they were absolute. The rest of Sunday passed in a strange quiet. Claire stayed in the living room, occasionally glancing at the folder. I remained in the office, reviewing the evidence one last time. Every transaction, every fabricated message, every detail was accounted for. I could not leave room for error. The executor had confirmed everything, and now the legal measures would formalize the outcome. Claire seemed to shrink in her own presence, as if the weight of guilt had transformed her. Even her usual gestures, once confident and purposeful, now seemed small, hesitant, almost childlike. She realized that her actions had consequences far beyond the immediate theft of funds. She had betrayed not just me, but the trust foundational to our marriage. I maintained composure, offering no judgment beyond the facts. Justice was now a matter of procedure. Each hour, each minute, reinforced the reality. The evidence could not be disputed, and her plans had unraveled completely. I felt a mixture of relief and solemnity. Relief that the truth had emerged unscathed, solemnity for the betrayal that had forced such measures. The coming days would finalize the resolution, but the moment of exposure, the raw, undeniable confrontation with her own actions, had already changed everything. Monday morning brought legal clarity. Bennett arrived at the house, folder in hand, and explained the next steps. Claire listened silently, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She realized fully that the inheritance was no longer within her reach, and that legal oversight would prevent any further manipulation. Bennett's calm, authoritative tone left no room for negotiation or denial. I observed silently, noting how her posture shifted from defiance to reluctant acceptance. Every carefully documented detail she had tried to hide was now part of an official report. As Bennett outlined the process, Claire occasionally whispered questions, each answered with procedural clarity that left no loopholes. The evidence, the executor's verification, and my meticulous documentation had converged into an unassailable position. She had been confident, careless, and overconfident, but patience and strategy had secured justice. I felt no joy in her defeat, only the satisfaction that truth and diligence prevailed. The inheritance, once threatened by her impulsive decisions, was now fully protected, and Alex's influence rendered irrelevant. This was the culmination of weeks of observation, preparation, and methodical execution. The quiet triumph was mine, not through vengeance, but through precision and patience. Claire finally spoke, voice small, almost defeated. I see now. There's nothing I can do, is there? I shook my head gently. No. The evidence, the accounts, and the law will ensure everything is secured. She sighed, a mix of frustration and acceptance, and I noted the subtle change in her demeanor. The arrogance, the entitlement, and the secrecy had vanished, leaving vulnerability and remorse. I realized how much damage secrecy could inflict, and how exposure, though painful, was often the only path to accountability. Her eyes, once filled with certainty, now reflected uncertainty and fear. She understood fully that manipulation and deception carried consequences. I reminded myself that my role was to ensure order and protection, not to inflict punishment. The executor's involvement guaranteed that the funds were secure, and legal oversight left no chance for further interference. Patience, observation, and meticulous preparation had produced justice without theatrics. As Claire processed the reality of her actions, I felt the weight of what had been necessary to restore balance and trust. The path had been difficult, but clarity had been achieved. By afternoon, Claire had grown silent, almost contemplative. I observed her from the doorway as she fidgeted with her hands, occasionally glancing at the folder. The weight of the situation had finally sunk in. Every impulsive decision, every secret transfer, every lie to cover her actions had led to this point. Alex, her lover, could do nothing to change the reality she had created. The executor's report, coupled with my detailed documentation, was now an unassailable fortress of evidence. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that justice was secured, and sadness for the erosion of trust in a relationship that had once been strong. Silence hung over the house, heavy with realization and consequence. Claire finally seemed to understand the magnitude of her betrayal, not just in financial terms, but emotionally and morally. She was forced to confront the depth of her own choices. I remained calm, patient, and composed. The confrontation had been effective, but the resolution required no further drama. The truth had done all the work. Justice, methodically executed, had restored order, leaving no room for manipulation or denial. Evening fell, and Claire remained quiet, a shadow of her former confident self. I prepared dinner, moving deliberately to maintain normalcy. She watched, hands clasped, occasionally whispering questions about legal proceedings. I answered calmly, knowing that clarity, not anger, would guide her understanding. The inheritance, now fully protected, remained untouched. Every detail, every transfer, every lie had been recorded and verified. The executor had done his part flawlessly, and my careful oversight had ensured no loopholes. Claire's reactions were subdued, her arrogance replaced by cautious reflection. I realized that patience and meticulous observation had been the most powerful tools, transforming what could have been chaos into resolution. She seemed to grasp the immensity of her actions, the betrayal, and the consequences. I remained composed, observing her transformation. The truth, methodically documented, had reshaped the dynamics of our home. The storm of deception had passed, leaving clarity, order, and the undeniable reality that trust, once broken, could only be restored through accountability. That night, Claire approached me cautiously. "Thomas, I understand everything now," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, acknowledging her realization. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the gravity of her actions and the inevitability of consequences. The inheritance was secure, the executor had confirmed the evidence, and legal processes would finalize everything. Alex, the catalyst for her betrayal, was irrelevant now. I realized that justice had been achieved not through confrontation or rage, but through methodical preparation, observation, and patience. Claire's demeanor reflected remorse, comprehension, and vulnerability. The trust she had destroyed could not be immediately restored, but accountability had been established. I reminded myself that this was not revenge, it was restoration. The evidence, meticulously collected, and the executor's verification had ensured that deception could no longer thrive. Claire seemed to grasp the enormity of what had transpired. She had learned, painfully, that manipulation and secrecy carried consequences. The inheritance, my trust, and my patience had converged to create a moment of clarity and undeniable truth. Late into the night, I reviewed every document one last time. Each transfer, every message, every digital trace, had been accounted for. Claire slept in the living room, exhausted, defeated, and silent. The executor had confirmed everything, leaving no room for ambiguity or dispute. The meticulous planning and observation over the past weeks had culminated in this unassailable moment of justice. I reflected on the process, the patience required, and the quiet triumph of methodical execution. No confrontation beyond the presentation of evidence had been necessary. Truth, patience, and preparation had done all the work. Claire's actions, impulsive and reckless, had led her to this reckoning. Alex's influence, irrelevant in the face of careful observation and legal oversight, had been neutralized. I realized that control, clarity, and calm had been the most effective instruments. The inheritance was secure, justice was evident, and the consequences of betrayal had been fully realized. The night was quiet, heavy with reflection, understanding, and the stark clarity of truth. Morning arrived, and Claire met me in the kitchen. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands still trembling. "Thomas, I'm sorry. I never meant," she began. I held up a hand. "I understand your motives, but actions have consequences," I said gently. The executor would finalize the protection of the inheritance today. Claire nodded, her pride gone, her confidence stripped away. She realized fully that manipulation, secrecy, and impulsive decisions carried weight beyond imagination. Alex could offer nothing. The meticulous records, verified transfers, and documented communications had sealed the outcome. I felt a quiet sense of resolution, a calm that had been absent for weeks. Justice had been achieved not through emotion, but through careful planning and patience. Claire seemed to grasp the immensity of her betrayal and the inevitability of its consequences. The inheritance, my trust, and the process of accountability had been preserved. She now understood, in stark, undeniable terms, the results of her choices. By afternoon, legal confirmation arrived. Bennett called, stating that the inheritance accounts were fully secured, with all unauthorized transfers reversed or frozen, and legal proceedings set to ensure final compliance. Claire sat silently, absorbing the reality of the situation. Alex's manipulation had been neutralized, her deceit documented, and her attempts at secrecy laid bare. I watched her closely, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the quiet acceptance replacing arrogance and confidence. The executor's role, combined with my careful observation, had ensured that justice was both evident and inevitable. Claire's understanding of the consequences was complete. The inheritance was secure, the betrayal exposed, and the process of accountability unavoidable. I felt a sense of closure, a calm certainty that the truth had prevailed. Patience, observation, and meticulous documentation had achieved what emotion and confrontation alone could not. The house was quiet, the tension dissipated, and the path forward, though difficult, was now grounded in clarity, justice, and undeniable truth. That evening, Claire finally spoke fully, voice steady but subdued. "Thomas, I know I've ruined things, and there's nothing I can do to undo it." I nodded. "You've faced the consequences, and the inheritance is secure. That's the truth of the matter." She nodded, silent tears streaming down her face. For the first time in weeks, the house felt still, the storm of betrayal passed. Justice had been achieved through patience, observation, and meticulous preparation. The executor's call had stopped her cold, exposing every lie, every misstep, and every impulsive decision. Alex's influence had been nullified, her actions fully documented, and her deception laid bare. I realized that truth, methodically revealed, carried power far beyond anger or confrontation. Claire had learned the cost of secrecy, manipulation, and betrayal. And as I sat quietly, reflecting on the ordeal, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The inheritance, my trust, and the careful orchestration of justice had restored order. The reckoning was complete, undeniable, and absolute. Silence filled the house, heavy with reflection, remorse, and the stark reality of truth.